overwhelming but fantastic information. Thanks, Shelley. It, I think, speaks and highlights to even the dietetic profession and how difficult and challenging it can be to do these teachings. Having said that, I very much appreciate the CCA for allowing me to speak today, and I very much want to thank the patients that I work with and the families that support them, because without them, I wouldn't have learned so much of what I refer to as the gluten-free treatment for celiac disease. I am called a dietitian. I hate the word diet, and I especially don't like the term gluten-free diet because I think it implies that there's a lot more flexibility than there really is, and there's a lot more that we can learn about the gluten-free therapy. So on the theme of hot topics, I have about 3 billion that I wanted to bring to the table today, and of course I limited it to 2 after discussing with my colleagues. And in particular, one of the common themes that parents and guardians ask me about is we're referring to the nutritional adequacy of the gluten-free diet. Do I get to play with this? Oh, wow, okay. Oh, no, that's a pointer. The big green button. Okay, very good. All right. So there might be some concepts that I'll review with all of you in the room today that is already known, but I think what the idea is to take these hot topics and to share them, advocate, learn more, expand on research, get resources to do better, ultimately. So on the topic of nutritional adequacy, one of the biggest concerns and what research is telling us about, and I'm going to be really, really quick here, is we know that the gluten-free diet is often touted and advertised as being, quote, healthier. However, if you look at the nutritional content of gluten-free versus gluten-containing foods, we know that in order to make these foods more palatable, in order for it to have the structure that it needs, the texture that it needs, you have to add nutrients back in when you remove gluten. So you add fat, you add carbohydrate, thereby increasing the caloric density of that particular food. So compared to gluten-containing products, a lot of gluten-free products actually have more calories in them per same unit serving. And they are often lower in fiber. And this has been well studied. In addition to that, one of the things that we certainly know about is that there's also less protein. So not as it just relates to children, but as it relates to adults, we want to ensure that anybody who has celiac disease and is following a strict gluten-free diet, that you are getting the optimal nutrition you possibly can. And unfortunately, if you look at the studies here that I've listed for you, that's not possible on a strict gluten-free diet. Oh, big green button. Okay, so we talk about if you want to improve the nutritional adequacy, well, what do? We eat more vegetables and fruits, right? That's just a common thing. Dietitians say it to everyone. It's super easy to do, right? Not at all. So we look at Canada's New Food Guide to Healthy Eating. We look at different handouts and resources. We look to dietitians. We look to other nutrition experts. But one thing that I can say wholeheartedly, and I feel that this isn't just in pediatrics, when you look at what people are actually eating, they're not eating well. And of what it is that they are eating, starches and grains make up a large proportion of the diet of Canadians. So these several studies that I have outlined here actually took the Canadian Community Health Survey of 2015 and looked at the consumption patterns of what Canadians are actually eating. And for any Canadian greater than 2 years of age, you see here that grains and starches make up about 30% of the whole diet. So I'm not talking about carbohydrates, I'm just talking about starches and grains, and that's a significant amount. And so when we're talking about actually where there might be some gaps there, which is my segue, and I'm trying to do this really quickly, so bear with me, into the next slide is, okay, so we eat a lot of grains in Canada. We eat a lot of starches in Canada, okay? So Shelley's gone through this. I'm sure all of you in the room here are aware of what are gluten-containing versus gluten-free grains. All right, so we've talked about wheat, we've talked about labeling, we've talked about oats, so I'm going to move forward. All in the interest of time, because really what I want is a lot of discussion, a lot of interaction, having ideas of how we can advocate more here. But one of the things that is hugely flawed in my opinion, and those of probably others, is that gluten-free grain flours are not fortified, they are not enriched. And when we talk about enrichments and we're talking about nutrients, so wheat is, not so bad. Wheat is fortified in Canada. It is fortified and it's identified there for you. It's probably a little bit small, but what are the mandated nutrients? Okay, and what are the nutrients that, the B vitamins, the folate, the iron, the protein, so what's mandated versus what is potential maybe. So if I just said to you in the previous slide that we as Canadians eat a lot of grains and grain flours, if you go on a gluten-free diet, somebody fill in the blank here, these flours aren't enriched in Canada, what are people with celiac disease missing? A lot of significant nutrients. Huge, huge concern. And again, I say this not just in infants, children, or teenagers, which I work with, but anyone who is strictly gluten-free for celiac disease. Now, my other hot topic. This one's a really, really hot one, and I don't know how many of you are aware of how hot this topic is, but CBC Marketplace just aired a great, great special about arsenic and arsenic in the food supply, okay? So, this is one case report that I took out of a literature review, and just to highlight we do know that arsenic exposure is currently a health concern. It is associated with cancers, it's associated with cardiovascular disease, it's associated with immunological deficiencies, and this is a case of a woman who was defined as being poisoned secondary to arsenic exposure, and the medical team that looked after her concluded that based on the environment that she's from, so this wasn't contaminated water, but she has celiac disease, strictly gluten-free, and that the poisoning was likely related to an overexposure of arsenic because her diet was very, very, very rich in rice and rice-based products. Now, for parents or guardians of infants and children who are still developing brain development, growth, and whatnot, I get asked this question multiple times every week. How much arsenic is too much? And what should I feed my child who has to be strictly gluten-free when all of the products that are available that my child's willing to eat are primarily rice-based, and I'm now worried about arsenic poisoning? And I use that word not lightly, but this is what families are asking me. They're asking me about poisoning, and I really don't know where to guide them. So, how do I go back? Back. Yeah, right. Siri, go back. Okay. So if we talk about arsenic consumption, this is kind of sort of the thread and the chain. So gluten-free products often do contain rice or some rice-based product. We do see that particularly, I can say, for children. A lot of snack products contain rice. Rice milk's quite popular now too, because apparently moo juice is not good for you either, according to, Goop and some other, Dr. Google and other very knowledgeable resources. So we go through this line of kind of sort of thinking, and very good. And we say to ourselves, well, what is it that's a problem? Is it really a concern? I can tell you that there is a plethora of research out there looking at this, and that there's something we absolutely need to do about this. We need to start getting food industry to look into arsenic. How much is out there? What are we being exposed to? We need better understanding of what's toxic and what's safe. That also needs to be identified across the age spans, and we need to disclose it. Us as consumers, not just us as clinicians, need to know what it is that we are encouraging people to consume and or what effects there are. So I am advocating here for all of us to learn more about arsenic exposure and what that means to people with celiac disease. In the meantime, though, what do I tell my families? I don't want to leave them with nothing, so I have to give them with some recommendations, which is try to eat a wide variety of foods, not just your rice-based products that are rich. Cook your rice with a lot more water, boil it a lot more, drain that excess. Do a little bit of combinations. You can do a rice quinoa mix. It's quite tasty, and if you fry it, right? Anything fried is delicious. And then just consider avoiding certain rice products, as we know that those are generally higher in arsenic. Thank you to Tricia at Gluten Free Watchdog, who's done a lot of really good work on this. Without her data, it makes it difficult for me to do my job. And also thank you to my colleagues throughout Canada. Shout out to Jessica, Diana Major, the Gluten Free food guide that might be coming out soon to look at the variety, and things that we can do to improve gluten-free therapy for people with celiac disease. Thanks.